We'll need somebody else to take notes for extra, I think.
I'll just keep doing it.
Ah, okay. All right, 10 o'clock, so I guess we should probably start to be on time. I'm Jim Fenton. Of course, this is Braun. You're in the Jmap session, or of the Jmap Extra joint session. Extra will be following Jmap. Whoops, what did I just do? Okay, yep, that was the right thing. So hopefully by this time of the week you have been well exposed to the note well, but we will continue to do it further. If you haven't read this in detail and read the reference documents, you need to do that because it by participating here, there are all sorts of issues with respect to intellectual property rights and so forth that you're granting, and also, we expect you to abide by the anti-harassment procedures and so forth, and to continue wearing your masks when you're not eating breakfast. There is also a note really well, which we don't have in this particular slide deck, that goes into more detail, in particular on things like code of conduct. So please use the Meet Echo tool. You can scan the QR code at the front if you're not there already. It looks like there's a yeah, we've got pretty good turnout for the Meet Echo tool at this point, so that's great. And use that when you're going to join the microphone queue. If you're not if you're not actively presenting, please turn off your audio and video and also your other audio noisemaker sorts of devices. And continue to wear your masks unless you're actively speaking at the microphone. And actually, we found that, as I'm doing right now, when you're actively speaking at the microphone, you can probably be understood even if you keep your mask on. If you're remote, please use a headset. That really helps cut down on echo and that sort of thing. And here are the places to find agendas and so forth that you have probably already found. So let's jump to the agenda. And this is kind of very top level. We'll be starting with Jmap, following with extra, and any other business. And was there a more detailed one for? Yeah.
Yeah, next page.
Next page. Okay. So here are the different drafts. We're going to be basically going through the current drafts, and we have a couple of proposed work items that we're going to discuss following that, and then we're going to go back over our milestones as we usually do. And then extra will be following a similar format. So is there any agenda bashing to be done? Hearing nothing, we will go on to the first item, which is Jmap blob. Are the slides there now? Are there blob slides yet?
Yeah, there should be. You might need to hit refresh in fantastic. I did refresh and it worked for mine, but you might need to go refresh separately, which is
I just
need to. Yeah.
I just did a.
No, not there. Unfortunately, it's in the data tracker. Let me just share it from mine. It's going to be easier, I think. Oh, they're not there again. There you go. I did refresh and they were there, and now they're not there. So let's try that again. Manage slides. It's there. Refresh. Deck's ready to be shared. It's not there. Wow. Okay. I'm doing great with data tracker so far. Not only with the Meet Echo thing, not only are these slides not in there, despite the fact that I did hit the refresh. There you go. Now they're there. But apparently, if you direct message somebody, what you write doesn't show up in the system anymore. Hey, there's really not much to say. Since last IETF, I added the digest response by request, which allows you to, the server can say which algorithms it supports, and then you can request that item on whatever range you've requested to download, and it will calculate the digest over that range, which allows you to, if you have a partial download, to check that it's correct before requesting additional data. So that seems quite a useful thing to do. And you can also request a digest of the entire content of a blob, which again will be quite handy for checking that you have the right thing downloaded. And so I need to add some more text around that, advice to implementers and some examples, at which point we'll do the third working group last call and hopefully the final working group last call before shipping this thing. I don't think there's anything else we want to add to Blob at the moment. So let's just get this one done. Any comments on that? Anything? I see a thumbs up. Awesome. I think I'm done then. Let's move on.
Okay, good.
Oh yeah, I need to unshare. You can do that.
Okay, so quotas is the next one that we have here, and let's see. Renee, do you want to?
It's already me. Okay. Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Okay. So regarding the quota, I'm gonna be quite fast as well. Yeah. So I mean, I got a few extra comments from Alexei. So thank you for that. If you are here. So first of all, the soft limit, just adding a few examples to make it more clear. Like you could use the soft limit, for example, to stop to block the user to send outgoing events like outgoing emails, creating new calendar events and stuff, but it would still be able to get emails, get incoming events like emails and calendar events created by somebody else. The example as well, I missed when we changed the result size from size to octet. I missed changing it in the example, so that's a good catch. I fixed that, and I added also some more content to the security consideration section regarding the Alexei's RFC. What he did as well for quotas on Jmap, and so adding some warnings and advice on the implementation, and that's pretty much it for me. If anybody has questions or if we're good.
I
No, I
don't
guess
see any
it's
movement
fine.
in the room, and nobody's joined the queue, so I think there aren't any.
Okay, thank you.
Next steps. Just before you disappear, what do you want to do for the next steps? Are we ready to working group last call this?
The next step?
Yeah, so...
sorry, can you repeat?
So do you think this document is ready for a working group last call now?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Alexei gave a thumbs up as well, so that sounds like yes.
Okay. I forgot to make slides for that, but yeah, thanks. I would appreciate.
Cool.
Okay, great. So the next item is, there's Jmap blob. It's somewhere in the middle of the list here. Okay, Jmap SMIME. which is Alexei.
Hello, next slide.
How do we share the
Okay.
presenter?
Yeah, just a quick reminder. So this is basically for sending SMIME signed and or encrypted messages. The two main attributes on email set is SMIME sign, SMIME encrypt. This hasn't changed. Next slide. So there were a couple of open issues which I addressed. One is controlling signing, whether it's encapsulated in application PK7 MIME container or whether it's multi-part signed, because they kind of both implemented, and we probably want to give people enough control to generate either. The default is true, which is application PK7 MIME, which I think is probably slightly easier to implement for people. And similar header protection. This is a feature of SMIME. There is a document in LAMPS about how to do this, and suggestion was to make the default true, so the headers is always email header is always protected. Next slide. So, Neil, if you want to comment now, that's fine.
Yeah, I read the draft, and I think it's looking pretty good. I just had one bit of bike shedding was related to the previous thing slide, which was just the name of that header protect field. Seems inconsistent with the others. Could we rename it something like SMIME protect headers or something like that? Like SMIME sign a page.
Okay, that's fine. To be honest, I kind of struggled with names here, so.
Yeah, it's hard. I just think. Sorry, do you want me to send you something?
Just send me a quick email and I'll change.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not
Yeah,
really
no
married to names, so that's fine. Cool.
Yeah.
So the only thing remaining is I think it would be helpful to be able to also automatically decrypt messages. For this, I probably need to talk to Neil to help me out how exactly this is going to work with probably email parse, but yeah, I ran out of time to do this round, but yeah, I think that's the only thing outstanding. So I'll get to it next time.
Cool. Timing, I guess. When do you expect to have this ready for working group last call?
Around 1:15, maybe a bit earlier.
All right.
Okay, well, I don't see anybody else in the queue, so I guess we'll go on to the next item, which is, I see a hand in the room. Did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I just had one quick.
You need to go to the microphone, and you should probably join the queue via the tool if you can.
Yeah, both the microphone and the queue thing, I was actually, for some reason, I got logged out, so I'm sorry for that.
Okay, who are you then, please?
Yeah, my name is Sachin Garg. I had just a quick question about the last point that Alexei mentioned about the decryption of part of the SMIME thing. And to be fair, I haven't really read the specs. I mean, I'm coming from something which is zero. My only point is the decryption part, should it not be handled by the client? I mean, how would the whatever the server would know actually what keys to use to decrypt it? That's a sort of a question on how this thing works. Might be a slightly off topic.
Right. So basically, because that is part of the extension is to be able to sign and encrypt, there are already keys. So if it has, assumption is there is some kind of directory or storage which is trusted by the user associated with Jmap. So if you have the key and you receive a message that can be decrypted, it will decrypt.
Okay, so the user trusts the source where the keys are stored and then the key decrypts.
Yes.
So the idea is that at my client level, I may not really need to store all the keys and everything. I may get a decrypted message over a TLS transport or something.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, in my implementation, we actually have keys kind of, well, CSR and certificate auto-generated. So again, you can extend this to automatically create and install certificates in your store, and then use this to sign and encrypt.
Any other questions, comments on this? Okay, in that case, we will move on to Jmap tasks. And Joris.
Hi, I'm Joris. Yeah, so in Jmap tasks, just a quick reminder, what's the goal that we want to have, what we want to achieve. We want to make a common standard also for Kanban boards and issue trackers, so not just for groupware. Next slide, please. Ah, there's a screen. Okay, so yeah, so basically this is a list of all the things that we discussed at last IETF that should now be hopefully sufficiently worked in. So the first thing was an error of mine. I added related to instead of extending relation, which should now be fixed with new values like depend on. Then the second one was a suggestion of Bron about how to add colors to categories and keywords. I added that to the spec. Then the third one, having estimated work as, so there was the point raised that estimated work isn't sufficiently specified, because I said it's just some value. It's in addition to estimated duration, because some systems don't use a duration, they use some abstract value. And I tried to come up with a better definition for it, and I now chose Fibonacci scale. That's like a recommendation to use Fibonacci scale. That's a common common scale people use in Agile to estimate their work. Yeah, that's what I came up with. I'm not perfectly happy with that, but yeah, for now, I don't know. First iteration, it should be good, I hope. Yeah, so then another thing mentioned at last IETF was that it was a bit unclear why we have impact in addition to priority. And now the text mentions that impact is one of the things that can be used to determine the priority later on, but it's not necessarily the same thing, basically. Just to make that a bit more clear. Then, yeah, I added this source property during the last revision. I threw that out because we already have prod ID, which we can use for exactly the same thing, which is something that Robert mentioned last IETF, which is a good thing. Yeah, and there are two other bigger things that I already bootstrapped during last IETF, which I'm gonna explain in the next two slides. So, next slide, please. So the first more or less big thing is progress tracking. There was a comment that it was a bit unclear that it has I extended the values of progress, and I created a suggested mapping of progress. And it was a bit unclear about that there were several values that were not really easily distinguished from each other. When is a work item resolved? When is it completed? When is it confirmed? When is it in process? And so on. And there was also the suggestion that some systems even allow defining custom workflows on a project level. So in the end, it doesn't really depend on the system on its own. It also depends on the project, how people design their own workflows. So the thing I came up with for extending progress, or like extending the spec to have better tracking of a workflow, that should also be, that should reflect what's there in issue trackers or Kanban boards, is workflow and two extra properties, one for the task list and one for tasks, which is workflow statuses and workflow status. So in the task list, you can define all the allowed values of your workflow, basically. So like you can already do in Jira. And the workflow status is then defines which must be a value of those that you defined in the task list. And it says which of the status, which of the work, where the workflow currently is, basically. And if you use the workflow status, then obviously progress doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. So it must be null. That's what's now in the spec, how it's written. Okay. Is there, yeah, maybe, yeah, we can go on. All right, and there's grouping is the next big thing. So here again, as a reminder, the idea is that we have different use cases, and task systems are more heterogeneous than typical group systems. So the idea was that also to make it interesting for task systems that don't have calendars, that don't have a lot of features, to reduce the implementation overhead for those. Okay, next slide, please. So I came up now, I already triggered from first discussion during last IETF. I came up now with those groups. So it's basically common, recurrences, assignees, alerts, localizations, custom time zones. So they're grouped by a feature set, basically. The methodology I used was I looked at 3 good reasons for grouping certain properties. So first of all, they should be uncommon in a certain type of system. Then they should not belong to the, like, they should not belong to the common group if they're uncommon in certain types of system. Then I moved it to out of the common group. They should be optional within JS calendar. So otherwise it doesn't make sense to exclude them from a common group. And they should require some additional business logic as well. So simple key value pairs is not something that necessarily needs to be in a different group than the common group. It's easily implementable by vendors. So as it is right now, each group is a separate capability in the spec. Last time we discussed about using sub capabilities. I decided against using sub capabilities because it avoids the additional complexity. We talked about having a not supported or set error, for example. And it was just, for me, it was just more natural and simpler this way. Of course, you can leave some comments on that. What I'm a bit unsure about is if it makes some developers unhappy that want to support all the different use cases now, because then they need to supply 6 different capabilities now instead of a single one. So that's basically kind of a trade-off, I don't know, or something that I don't really like about having 6 different capabilities. Yeah, so just a question in the room. Do you still like it how it turned out? Do you have some comments on it? So I'm not sure. Maybe we can go to the next slide. This should be the last one for grouping. So basically here it's just a list of systems and what kind of groups they would need to implement, just as a validation that it kind of makes sense, that the grouping that's now there. All right, Robert?
Yeah, this is Robert Stepanek. I have couple of other points I would like to bring up but for grouping specifically. So what's the idea of what should systems do if they get a JS task that includes properties that are in a group they do not support? Are they supposed to reject it then, or are they supposed to just store it? What's the idea here?
You mean
Like if you have a recurring task, but let me see on the list. But Zimbra,
Right.
what should Zimbra do when they do not support recurrences? Should they?
Yeah, they can just it's just the normal capability definition as it is. So if you don't understand a capability as a server, I don't exactly remember what the spec says.
I think they would reject it then, right? So okay, so you would. So one would need to send for the JS task in Jmap for tags along with the capabilities that the data contains, so that the server can identify if it supports all of that.
Well,
Yes. Yeah.
Robert, like I think it's this is a client talking to a server, so it's kind of if you implementing it, the capabilities let the client negotiate with the server what it supports and turn on and off features. If you were importing the data from elsewhere, so it had you had exported something with recurrences from Google Workspace, importing it into Microsoft Planner that didn't support it, then it'd be up to the import tool to say, sorry, this has stuff in it that we don't support. You can import it and we'll strip that stuff, or maybe don't.
Okay,
right?
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to add a quick question on this. There were more groups on the previous page than actually being used on here. So do we have stuff that no one uses? And if so, is it worth actually keeping those?
Wait, are there more groups?
Because this one's got recurrences, alerts, and assignees. I think the only ones on this page that are actually being you put next to what people are doing. The previous page, I think, had custom time zones and something else, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Localizations, custom time zones. Yeah, so those two don't appear on that list at all. So
that's correct.
Should we actually have them at all if no one's using them?
Maybe I should have looked a bit deeper. That's a good point. That might have gone lost in what I looked at. Yeah.
The simpler the better in many respects.
It's somewhere, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't look deeply into those two. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a good point.
No worries. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
That's me. I'm sorry for the name Sachin. I need to fix the data tracker that to show it up in Roman. Yeah, Sachin. Yeah. So I had a couple of things. One is this particular point about between the client and the server. If I remember, in the internet world, we have this whole concept of send or be very conservative in what you send and be very broad-minded in what you accept. So I think that philosophy about if Zimbra doesn't, if I'm getting something from Zimbra and there are alerts there, I don't support it. Okay, fine, forget it. If I'm sending I'm not sure whether the other servers actually use that philosophy or build on that philosophy. If I send them 2-3 different things, will they just neglect what they don't know or how do so that's so. But I think if it's going to be for a particular implementation, it needs to be pretty broad-minded in what it accepts, and if it doesn't implement it, fine. That's sorry, not supported. The other thing I had this point was when you mentioned impact versus priority.
Sorry, what?
Impact and priority.
Yes.
So my thinking is that impact is what impacts me as a person who's creating a task for you. Priority is what you decide whether you want to take it up or not. So something is an issue with me. There's a bug, like for example, the DHCP v6 bug in Android, which has been pending for a long time.
Yeah.
It impacts the entire Android community which wants to use DHCP v6, but it is not a priority for the Google developers to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that is, the key point that we can possibly somehow make it.
Okay, you mean I should state that also, like to make that a bit more clear in the text. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good point. So that's the point that it's important to have both in the spec. It's not the same. Yeah. Wow, quite a lot of people.
Robert, letting me in. Yeah, in regards to rejecting properties you don't understand versus, you know, just being able to store any extra properties, I would rather the server is able to store any extra properties, because it doesn't advertise the capability. Obviously, it cannot do any automation based on them or any, you know, derived property or anything like that. But I think it would be better, safer if it can actually store them.
I agree. But that's a thing in a core spec, right? That isn't it already defined like that? I don't remember 100%. So
okay, if it cannot be done, that's fine.
No, it can be done, but yeah.
All right, Robert.
Robert Stepanek again. I have two remarks not related to grouping. So I think we're done with the grouping discussion.
All right.
Okay. So the first one is just an uneducated remark regarding the estimated work property.
Yeah.
So I understood that there are multiple scales of how to estimate work, but at the moment there's just a single numeric value to store that. Would it make sense to add an additional value to define the scale it is done in when there are different estimating schemes that can be used?
Okay. Yeah. The thing is, I didn't really find, like, typically it's just a value, you know, it just says how much work is this, and it's now, it doesn't say that there's an actual unit to it. But I tried to come up with like the common thing that people do in the agile world, and the common thing that I found was the Fibonacci scale. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I would also be happy to just say this is just a value, and you know, even estimated work as an abstract value, it will depend on the team, you know, to say, well, this is a 6, so this is a 10. It's I think it's difficult to have like an interoperable unit that you know, that different systems will understand. I don't know.
Yeah, that's how I understood the definition of the property, although I then I wouldn't understand why even the Fibonacci scale should be mentioned if it's really an internal decision.
Okay.
Although I would assume that if tasks are supposed to get shared between systems, then some common definition must be defined.
At least the
in
direction would
data.
be handy, knowing which is larger than the other.
Yeah.
Is the bigger number larger or the smaller number larger? It's probably worth
All
knowing.
right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other remark is organizational and goes more to the chairs, which is now that Jmap for tasks defines updates to JS calendar tasks, but JS calendar is currently getting reworked. I don't know how to solve these dependencies.
We'd probably send them through together. That's fairly normal to cluster documents together when they're related to each other. So hopefully these two can go together. Otherwise, we'd need to wait for JS calendar to go first.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
All right.
But this would want to go at the same time as Jmap calendars as well. Like Jmap tasks as a kind of system.
Okay. Yeah, and the last slide is just that we are still working on feedback, gathering feedback. So we have, through the NGI project, we have some initial feedback from the Wecan developer, and the developer from To-Do also gave some feedback within the CalConnect rounds. Yeah, but there's still more to come. There's still more work to do. Yeah, there are still some next steps before we can go to a last call, definitely.
Cool. Do you need anything from the working group other than reviews?
Not right now.
Cool.
And did you capture Murray's comment? Murray, do you want to make a comment at the microphone or anything? Because just in case people didn't see it on the chat.
Yeah, it's not a question for the work in particular. It's actually more directed to the chairs and the working group as a whole. Calyx has never been something I know a lot about in depth. So as I'm reading the charter, the word tasks doesn't appear anywhere in it. And I'm starting to think, oh no, you've strayed from the charter and I didn't catch it in time. But then someone said that tasks sort of falls under calendaring generally. So like, that's fine. And then in that case, the only thing missing is please send me a milestone so I can track it.
Except this isn't Calexed.
Yes, calendaring in general. And you already are chartered to do calendaring related work. So that's what I was getting at. I didn't know how tasks were related to the charter, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, in the Calyx formats, tasks are a subset of calendars. So.
Okay.
All right, very good.
There are other things in the agenda that don't have slides. We should talk through them as well.
Right, and yeah, let's hit those before we go to the new topics. So we'll just bring up the agenda for this.
Calendars and sharing specifically, which I think are both Neil.
Well, calendars is Robert, I think, right?
Neil.
Oh.
That's probably
Oh.
more me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically, calendars is waiting on resolving the JS calendar discussion that's happening in Calyx at the moment, particularly around identifying who participants are, corresponding participants with who you are. So hopefully we'll get that resolved soon, and then it was being basically done for a while now, so hopefully we'll be able to finish that off. And sharing too. We'll probably want to publish sharing calendars, tasks kind of together. They're all related. If tasks is going to be nearly ready too, and with the JS calendar revision. So yeah, sorry there's not been a huge amount of progress, but I'm hoping once we have this JS calendar thing resolved, we'll be pretty much there.
Cool, thanks Neil. So yeah, we'll basically just wait and put them through with tasks when tasks is ready.
Sure.
Cool. All right, new work.
Okay. New work.
Oh yeah. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to see it as well.
Oh.
Ken's going to pop up.
Okay, so Civ, I don't have any slides because there's not much to talk about. The only change since Vienna was tracking the changes in the blob spec. Other than that, this has been kind of idling for the last 2 cycles, waiting for implementation experience with the test method, which has yet to come. So I think what I'd like to do is pull that out of this spec and leave it as an extension. It's already optional in this particular spec. And I think with the process IMAP draft, which will be talked about in the extra session, there might be a couple additions needed for the test method anyways. So rather than hold this up, I think that's probably the best way forward. We've got this running in production at Fastmail. It's totally replaced our managed Civ implementation. And so far, we haven't seen any problems with it. So unless there's outlying concerns that haven't been brought to my attention, I think we're probably ready for last call after I pull the test method out. Lexi.
Yeah, well, I think you, Bron, and I had a discussion, and maybe just leave it in. And
Do you see a problem pulling it out. And
well, I mean, if you want to do the work and split it up, split it off, I don't see a
it
problem.
already has its own capability, so it's basically just moving into a separate draft. So this
Okay.
can move forward.
I kind of feel it's a bit incomplete without it, you know, for real world implementations, but and it's not a big deal, I suppose.
As a replacement for manage Civ, test isn't necessary at all, I don't believe.
Okay. I don't remember.
But we can take it to the list. If you feel strongly about it, we'll leave it in, and then
No,
we
I
need
don't.
somebody to try to
No,
promote it.
I don't feel strongly about it, but I think maybe what we should do is you want to investigate how to extend IMAP action anyway for this, right?
Right.
So maybe just look at it and see how it will extend and whether you already have generic ability to have, stuff, extra options that the engine can act on, which is kind of part of the
Yep,
state.
understood. My only fear is that without somebody actually implementing it and using it, there may be other missing pieces that we're unaware of. And I hate to publish something that's not going to work for people that need it.
Okay. All right.
Rick.
Yeah, this is Rick Cygnus. As for incompleteness with managed Civ, I can tell you it's definitely, there is no capability that matches the Civ script Jmap testing behavior in managed Civ. It's a novel thing designed to replace an internal system at Fastmail. So managed Civ has check script, right? It does a compile, and we've built that into the existing Civ script behavior. And I think it's a great idea to split them. The basic problem being, one of the reasons we don't have an implementation to test with a user-facing implementation to test at Fastmail is we've never figured out the right way to present it to users. And if we can't find a way to say, here's how to simulate this and present it to users, it's unclear that it's technically sound, right? We might realize that the testing of the input and output can't be made useful as an actual simulation tool. But meanwhile, as a replacement for managed Civ, it's done the job. We're done. We've shut off managed Civ. So publishing everything done now seems like it can replace the old facility, and this new thing is still just an idea.
If there's no other comments, I will proceed to remove this out of the current draft and then ask for a working group to call.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right, you work.
Okay, on to new work. We'll start with migration and portability. I think that was the first one on the agenda.
All right. Just a quick organizational note. If we're kind of low on time, then we can skip the preferences part. But
We'll go ahead.
all right. Okay. So yeah, I prepared two small presentations about our experiences or some ideas that we have with Jmap. The first one is to use Jmap as a protocol for data portability and migration. So in our use case, we want to use Jmap as a generic one-time API, basically. And one-time API is kind of a weird word. Let me try to explain. So in our world, we have a lot of legacy systems from which we want to move to a more modern system. This legacy system has typically, or some of them have no API. So what we're looking for is an API to be used for the task of migrating away from the old system to a new system. And what would be great would be to point developers that get this task to an API specification that they can just, then they can say, okay, we have this legacy system. We can just put this API in front of it and be done with it, basically. So it makes the job a bit easier for developers for this specific use case. And we looked at Jmap for this use case. You can use Jmap for a lot of different data types, which is great. So it's powerful enough. It has a lot of features, more than enough actually than we need. So that's perfect. The thing that we struggle a bit with is the ease of implementation for server developers. So let me go to the next slide. So what we tried to use Jmap for this use case is to bend it a bit to make it more rapid, to make it easier for third-party developers to implement the Jmap API. And so these are just some ideas that we had. So how we change the core API. So so developers are actually interested in implementing this without too much overhead. So the first idea is that we focus on key objects and properties from the API, from the spec, which are necessary for the migration use case. So I don't know, in some cases you don't even need query. Of course, if it's a huge data set, you need it, but in some cases you don't. In some cases, you don't need specific properties of even a GET request. You don't need to implement the whole thing. So basically what we right now have is a document stating what's important and what's not important for this particular use case to make it easy to implement. So also what we did is we skipped the session object, which is quite a big one in my opinion. We can do that when the username equals the account that you use for login, basically. So if you only have a single user and a single account, you don't need the whole complexity about mapping an account to a lot of different user IDs. Yeah, and this just reduces quite some overhead. Yeah, not such a, I don't know, easy choice to do that. Also, we introduced a simplified request for this. Can you go to the next slide for this? Or yeah. So yeah, so to make it really easy for people, some people maybe don't even want to parse JSON in their API. They just want to give us some JSON that we can parse. So we have this way that they can choose either implement the normal way, very simplified GET request that you can see down there, or have just don't use JSON at all for the request, have it all in the URL. Yeah, so we then call this simplified request. Yes. So can you go to the next slide? Okay, so that's basically the idea here, to have an API for rapid development with which we reuse existing Jmap concepts and libraries, which is good because we can reuse parts of Jmap. Other people will be more interested in implementing Jmap. We think it can be beneficial for the whole ecosystem because it might spark interests that's not already there. Yeah, there are some related problems that we ran into. Like we could, one could also expose certain archives laying around on the system and the file system. For example, some people have, I don't know, folders with iCalendar files or vCards that you could easily expose with this, with the wrapper. Yeah. So those are basically some thoughts that we have, some work that we did, and I just wanted to put this out there. And the idea was that right now we have some internal document that we point people to, but it would be nice to have it to put it in some public place. It's probably not worth an RFC, I would say. But yeah, I want to leave that open for discussion. Maybe we have a document on some website, or do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Just pop myself in the queue
All
here.
right.
One thing I was thinking of way back even was doing more of a REST type API. So rather than the query parameters, to actually have a path object type and then ID underneath that. And if you do a query on just the object type, you get a list of all the IDs, and then you can request each of them as a single item. So making it feel more like a standard REST API as a different way of accessing Jmap data, because Jmap is very neatly separated into objects with IDs. So mapping it to REST might be something that's worthwhile as a general document. Whether that's an easier way to do it than this, it seems like a useful thing to have.
Okay.
Yeah, Alexei, it looks like you're modifying or extending things, to make it simpler to use for certain cases. So this should be a document. Whether we choose to publish it, it's kind of a separate issue, but I think there should be a draft, yeah.
Okay.
And, Bron's idea makes sense as well.
All right. Yeah, would there be interested in having this as a draft idea in this working group? Is that per charter fine, or?
Yeah, by the charter, it's fine.
All right. Yeah. Then. Okay. Sounds good, I would say.
Cool. I guess publish a draft first, and then we can do a call for adoption. Maybe publish it as informational.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds good. Great. Okay. So the next thing, I hope it's very quick. Yeah, it's basically about preferences. It's some other thing that we did, some other ideas that we have. I just wanted to present here, just to give you some ideas what one can do with Jmap. So, group web preferences are not very well standardized. Everybody does his own thing. Yeah, there are different ways, like there are different dimensions even to it. So they can be in a certain context, the preferences, for example, in out of office, in a mail context, or for calendars, there are specific preferences that one can have, but they can also be in a global context as well. And there's the second dimension here is that preferences can be in a dedicated data structure. For example, you have an extra object like calendar preferences, or they can reuse other mechanisms that are already there. For example, you can have some preferences as Civ filters. Then there are also the third dimension is that there's it can be in a different scope. So for example, preferences can be in the user scope, but there are also some systems where they are in the admin scope, is what we call it. For example, some Civ rules might be there for a certain user, but the user actually doesn't see them. It's somewhere on the system, some admin created those rules or this preferences, and it's there, but hidden from the user, visible to the admin. That's just about the state right now for group web preferences. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so recently we did a project, or we currently do it, where a vendor wants to expose certain settings for a big migration. And here they want to expose allow lists and block lists. For this, we defined a new Jmf Preferences Object. yeah, just a normal, I don't know, normal Jmap way that you do this by having a separate capability. The link is down there with which contains some documentation on it. And we did this because having a Jmf Preferences Object is, or we did this for this ISP project because, again, we can use Jmap. Jmap is something we already support, and yeah, it's something that we can point others to easily implement. And yeah, maybe there's also, it also is also beneficial for the whole ecosystem in general. So the way we currently did this, just to give you some example what we did, or some example how you can use Jmap, is oh no, can you go back?
Sorry. I thought that
So we did. There's already a calendar preferences object, for example. We just have a generic preferences object in this case because it's about allow lists and block lists, is a generic kind of thing. And yeah, because it was very easy for our use case right now, we have a separate capability for this generic preferences object that, you know, that extends the general object with settings. So for example, with the general preferences object, doesn't have a lot of things, but then the preferences allow list or block list extension gives it additional attributes that, yeah, that are specific for block lists and allow lists. And with that, you could extend the whole preferences object with more and more preferences depending on the way it's implemented in each system. Okay, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, why do we do this? Yeah, we want to stress the usefulness of Jmap for the data portability use case, for the migration use case. You can use it in a lot of different contexts. It's easy to extend. Yeah, we did this on our own, so we're interested in some feedback, some opinions on it. Yeah, and I think it's also good to have to go forward, standardize a bit what preferences should look like, to understand them a bit better, because it's currently not very well standardized. And the next step is for us is also like similar to the migration use case, is to have some kind of document that describes what preferences are, yeah, how you could standardize them, but we're not very confident of having that as an RFC yet, but yeah, that's open for discussion. Yeah, that's basically it, just to share some experiences, to get some feedback. All right, so there are already some questions or some remarks on that.
And Sachin, could you put on your mask, please?
So my point, as I understood this particular aspect, this is largely an implementation issue for the implementation to get to know what certain preferences are, as one of your use cases is. The adding the block list or a reject list. It's a particular mail server to, at that end, to be able to understand either what ISPs to use, what IP addresses to accept mail from, and things like that. So why should it be part of the Jmap per se, rather than being an data that is known to this specific implementation per se? It may store it in a database, it may store it as a JSON object, it may store whatever properties it needs to store in however way it wants to do it, without actually it being part of a specific part of the Jmap, which is an access protocol between the client and the servers. This doesn't really need to, that's what my thinking is, that the Jmap server that you are having, for example, your fastmail server, it may have certain configuration attributes which are dependent on how your implement server is particularly being implemented, rather than being part of a protocol specification. I mean, based on what I understand is the use case, that's what my thought is.
Okay. So you're saying it's out of scope for the protocol, but it's still nice to have like get a deeper understanding and to, I don't know, describe what's out there, how it can be done.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it is to do it there, but I think that my limited understanding. So excuse me if I'm.
No, makes sense. I also said it's probably more of a best practice document than part of the protocol. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just talking about the previous point briefly, Jmap is the protocol, but this is still data, and it's still something you want to either synchronize or be able to send from the client to serve, whatever else. So that's kind of the point of this. But as you mentioned earlier, I don't think there's any kind of common enough subset that we could choose to be worth kind of publishing a standard on the data type. At least I doubt it. But a best practice document of if you're creating a preferences object, this is the kind of things you should consider. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. Like we have a bunch of them at Fastmail, kind of like the calendar preferences one. But the actual data types themselves, the specific properties, like that's just going to be quite service specific, I suspect, mostly.
Okay, go ahead, Hans-Jörg.
Hello, can you hear me good? Hear me well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thanks. Yeah. So I agree, which was said previously. So I think certainly it's the client service thing, because this is something that some UIs and clients do manipulate on the server side. So it's, I think, certainly something that fits into the client server interaction, first of all. Regarding the second point Neil said, I mean, it's true that this is certainly nothing which is the same with every system, but that we see several settings, and also allow list blacklist is a property which multiple systems support in a similar way. And as of now, what we experience in migration is that this is a very big problem, because there's always a big work to do the translation. And having something like a best practice reference within Jmap would maybe help vendors to adopt a more standardized solution, and thus in the future promote portability and interoperability with respect to those settings. That might not apply to each and every setting, but for instance, for this particular one, we made it as an example here. This could well be. If this needs to be an RFC, I don't know anyway, so it can also be a document. I agree with that, but I would not rule out in general that this is something that might be helpful to standardize a little bit.
Just regarding block list, in a specific example, I would consider that a separate data type. Like each item is a block, like an email address or a domain, and that's certainly how we model it, because that makes it then more efficient to add stuff to remove stuff, and to resync another client if you've added a blocked address on one client and you want to resync another one, rather than being just like a whole blob in your preferences object.
Maybe what we can I answer? It's okay. Oh, are you finished?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Sure.
I didn't want to interrupt you. Sorry. I think what we can agree upon or conclude at this point is it might make sense. Maybe it might make sense to work out some more of these settings and discuss about them in more detail at a later session, maybe, and see if there is some common ground for that or not. Huh?
Sure.
I would not go too much into the detail here for that particular discussion,
Yeah,
because that was not the intent. But I see that might be a good opportunity at a later session to think about more deeply, and maybe we come with more examples which systems use it in which fashion. Yeah? Cool. Also given the time right now. But thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, I also say thank you for the feedback. And thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. I think we're now at the point of milestones or any other business for the Jmap working group. Was there anything? Oh, yeah, that's extra. So I think that might be it for Jmap. Any other business for Jmap before we move on to milestones? All right, here are our existing Jmap milestones. I figure we may as well just edit them directly here rather than putting it in the notes and having to move it otherwise. So starting with blobs, we're obviously moving that along to August, given that I need to update the draft and send it off to my co-chair for working group last call. And then we will hopefully submit this finally in August. Submit Civ document. I think we agreed likewise. It will basically be ready to go straight after this.
I'm editing it now. The new one will be up by March.
There we go. August. Jmap calendars is certainly going to be later. So I think we should probably punt that to, do we think we'll get tasks done, I guess, by next IETF would be the question there, because that will, if we're going to cluster this together.
Is it on? Oh. Yeah, I don't think the next one is already, it will be finished by then. Maybe the after next. It's and regarding tasks, it's not even on the milestone list yet.
Yeah, no, we'll create one for that in a second.
Okay.
All right, I'm
You don't
going to put,
necessarily need to cluster them together. Let's see if it's ready, and we don't think it's going to be a problem. We can publish it, but let's see when we
Cool.
get there, I guess.
I'll just move it to December for now then.
Yeah.
Quotas we think is basically ready to go, so that will be August as well. SMIME sender extensions. October. Jmap address books. We've got that ready to be adopted in November, so that was.
Still sounds
I don't know who
plausible. Once
Yeah.
calendar is basically done and JS
Yeah.
Contact. JS Contact's the biggest hold up on that. Robert, when's do you think that'll be finished?
We want to publish JS Contact before or the latest at next ITF.
Yeah, so adopting it next
So,
ITF makes
that should
sense.
be fine then. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so let's add some more milestones. We say submit JS Jmap tasks document to ASG, and we said that is probably going to be early next year.
Well, if addresses are ready before,
If addresses are ready before, we don't necessarily have to wait for the next IETF to do the call for adoption. We can do that on the list. So let us know.
Yeah, it's nice when it happens. All right, so tasks, I've got one ready for that to go in there. What else did we have that we had said? So sharing, that we don't have a milestone for sharing. I'll create a separate milestone for that. And I don't think we had a milestone. Yeah, we've got Civ, we've got tasks, we've got blob, we've got quotas. That might be it then. And this other work is going to be, do we want a milestone for the migration and portability doc, or do we just do a call for adoption and then add a milestone for it if at that point?
Yeah, I think let's do a call for adoption first and then.
Cool. All right, so ASG, and so we'll do the Jmap sharing document as well, and that we'll put in December along with calendars. So we've got four change dates, 2 additional milestones done. There we go. for this, it is Murray. Yeah. All right, Jmap milestones completed. Thank you, everybody. That's the end of the Jmap section of this meeting, and we'll move on to the extra section. Thanks, Jim. I'll unshare my screen. Go back to the agenda slides. So this is our current agenda for the extra section of this meeting. Any agenda bashing before we move straight on? You've already been note-welled. Keep noting it. Alexi, I've got you first for IMAP partial, and I think I gave you more time than you need.
Yes, I rejected doing slides because there is nothing new to report. I think you said it will be sent to working group last call.
Yep, so sharing, sorry, IMAP partial, I will send to working group last call straight away, straight after this meeting.
Sounds good.
Does anyone have any objections, comments, etc. before we move on? Anything you want to talk about for IMAP partial? It's the fastest 10 minutes in existence. Thanks, Alexi. Next on this list, process IMIP, Ken.
Not much to say on this one. It's in production at Fastmail. Seems to do the job. I'm not sure how many people have actually read it, but maybe working last call would get some reviews. Unfortunately, with the passing of Ned Fried, we've lost one of our big Civ reviewers, so we need to pick up the slack. Should I do Snooze at the same time?
Sure.
Pretty much the same story with Snooze. Again, in production, works. I think we've had a couple reviews on it, but as far as I'm concerned, it's fully baked and ready to go to the last call.
Neil.
Yeah, just on the process IMIP draft, I read that. It refers to a calendar ID, but there's no information at all about what the scope of that is or where one would get a calendar ID or what a calendar ID is. I mean, I know what we use for calendar ID, but I'm saying from the draft, I would have absolutely no idea of what this calendar ID is that I'm trying to get, where to get it.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of outside the scope though, because it's
maybe, but I like it needs something. I felt like.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
That's fine. All right, I'll add some text to that, and then perhaps we go to last call. All right. Thank you.
Cool. So it's updated draft and then working group last call. Cool. And for Snooze, did anyone have anything to add for Snooze? Otherwise, we'll send that to working group last call as well. Excellent. Next on our agenda, where is our agenda?
Just a quick comment. I mean, it looks like we're going to have like 4 documents ready for last call almost simultaneously. I think they all should go into last call, but if you can stagger them so there is no more than 2 documents at a time, ideally, or at least, you know, give them an extra week, you know, to start or something.
Yeah, this is Barry. I would say give them extra time, but put them all out at the same time. Don't artificially spread them out. Just give us more time to get them done. What? Yes.
Thankfully, they're all fairly short documents, so that will help a bit. All right, back to the agenda. Civ Registry was the other thing that we had on this list, Alexi.
I think Civ Registry is ready as well, right? I'm looking at Ken, who is my co-editor now. At least we couldn't think of anything that was missing. So at this point, I think we need reviews.
All right. I guess that's another document for working group last call. That's
And in a way, I mean, this one is slightly weird because it's more mechanical. So
Yeah.
if somebody can try to double check the data, but
This is Kenny. I think we've covered everything. And just as a point of reference, I added in the snooze draft, I added an entry for the registry. So presumably they will either go together or the registry goes first and then snooze follows.
cool. Awesome. All right, we're on to the new work. So Rick.
See if I remember what's on my slides. Okay, yeah, so this is snoozing via IMAP. I think the idea of this feature is probably well understood at this point, especially since Ken was talking about Civ via the snooze via Civ. This is if you got a message in a mailbox and you want to hide it away until some future time. It's present in a bunch of clients and just a few servers. Next slide. Yeah. So what you see in servers and clients implement this is you take a message and you say, I don't want to think about this message for some period of time. The message vanishes from your view unless you go looking for it. And when that time expires, the message comes back. I've seen this implemented in half a dozen clients and 2 or 3 major servers. Next. So this is a basic proposed command. This command is built on top of the Jmap semantics for snooze, which I realized today we have never brought up, but they're implemented by Fastmail. The idea is this. You take a message and you snooze it, which moves the message using move semantics into a snoozed mailbox. This is a new special use mailbox. When the message is there, it's picked up 3 new data items on the message, and those are the awaken to, awaken flags, and awaken at. This tells you when the message stops snoozing, where will it be put, how will its flags change, and when does that happen. If you snooze it from any mailbox other than snoozed, it will awaken to wherever you snoozed it from. And if you snooze it from snooze, you just leave it awakening to the same place. These are broad strokes of how I think we can implement this based on what we're already doing at Fastmail and what I've seen in other places. But I think if we have significant feedback on how other people need or want this to work, that's why we're bringing this up. Next slide. Right, I've covered this. This is what we do with it. If you can't unsnooze it to the predefined mailbox, it goes to inbox, but hopefully that never happens. Next. We also, yeah.
Covered that too.
Yeah, well, okay. So one thing I'll throw in here, we use flags. I'll talk about why. When we snooze and unsnooze these messages, you just get a list of flag changes to make when it wakes up. This is supposed to talk about unsnooze, I believe. I think I've got some typo on my slide here. When you unsnooze a message, right, you're saying cancel the snooze. I'm ready to deal with it early. What do we want to do with the awaken flags? The semantics I put in here are we clear them. We don't add the add flags. We don't remove the remove flags. We'll have to see what we actually want on this. Next slide. The snoozed mailbox is it's read-only. You can't put mail in it except via snooze. You can't remove mail from it except via unsnooze, and we create it as needed. This is not the same design we see in every implementation. There are implementations that leave the message in the current mailbox and will flag the message with a flag, or will give it some other metadata to indicate that it's been snoozed, or implementations that put the message into the snoozed mailbox to snooze it, and to unsnooze it, remove it from the mailbox. But if you're using move to implement snoozing, you're losing the ability to enforce that the metadata has been set correctly, which is why we're proposing a separate verb.
Rick, we have some people in the queue. Do you want to take them now? Or at
Yeah,
the
yes,
end?
thanks. I can't see them on the screen I'm looking at.
Yep.
Yeah, Neil, I think you're up first.
Cool.
Yeah. So it didn't look like you currently have any way of specifying the folder to return to other than like implicitly. It's like wherever I snoozed it from. We actually do use both because in labels mode, it always snoozes from the inbox and returns back to the inbox, regardless of where you snooze from.
That'd be great.
So if you want to add that here too.
Yeah, we can add that. The reason it's not there is this started as what's the simplest version of this we could expose privately, and as we bring it to this room, it's what could everybody else possibly want. I'll stick that in the notes.
I think the default, it should be optional if you don't supply it back to the mailbox it came from. Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yep. Philip?
Yeah, Phil Baker. Yeah, have you considered the interaction of this with tasks? And when I'm using this sort of functionality, it's really because I want to create a task for myself later on.
Yeah.
And my client doesn't support that. So it might be worth thinking about the two together. Yeah.
I mean, I think the answer I can give you on that, thinking about this with respect to tasks, is as a individual human, I have daydreamed about how I would use that, but we haven't done any serious protocol discussion of it, and we can bring that up on the list of how we might do something. Hans-Jörg?
Thanks, Rick. That's interesting, but I have a couple of questions. I'm not sure if some of them might be answered in following slides. So interrupt me maybe if I'm asking something stupid, which you will explain anyway. So a very minor question is, so how does it interact with the reason flag? So because, clients use that already as a kind of, to denote some message is fresh on the server. Will this reactivate reason until unsnoozed or not? Then what's not quite clear for me is the client is who is doing the snooze interaction. So I understand that somehow the server implements that snooze mechanism, the moving out of the snooze state when the date has been passed and so on. But it's actually the clients that need to be taking action, I guess. So I wonder a little bit how that kind of how it's ensured that once the server moves the message back in the unsnooze state, what is the client expected to do? And third question, if you can still take one, is you say it's not allowed to append messages to that Snoozed mailbox. So I wonder about what is about migration here. So if we migrate a mailbox which has this feature, we might need to migrate messages which are in the snooze state into a new destination system. So this would require append actually probably.
Yeah. Okay, first let me apologize. The audio quality in here is not perfect. I may have missed some of your question. As regards to what is the client expected to do, does come up a bit later, but the short answer is the client is simply expected to show the user that the message has returned to its previous state. So this means, number one, the message is back in its awakened to mailbox. And number two, what we do at Fastmail with the flags is we use a flag to indicate that a message has entered that mailbox by awakening from snooze, and then it will display differently. I think a convention on that would be useful, but not necessary. I do think it's important to talk about this being a server function to awaken the message, because you would like your message to awaken no matter which client you are using, and you don't want your mail client to have to awaken it if you're using a not snooze capable client to read your mail when you've snoozed it from one that can. As for migration, it's not a question I've thought about. I don't have a great answer. I think the simple one is you would migrate the message to its awakening target and snooze it then. It would get the job done, even though it's a little silly. Okay, Barry.
Hi, this is Barry Leba. So I haven't read the draft yet, so this is a question.
There's no draft, there's only slides.
Okay. Oh, okay. The question is about the use of the special use mailbox.
Yes.
The user may not move mail out of this mailbox. That's, as far as I can remember, unique at this point. That special use mailboxes are like every other mailbox, except they're used for certain other things. We don't have a case where you're not allowed to put something in there with a move command or a copy command, or you're not allowed to take it out with a move or a copy command and that sort of thing. How are you planning to write this up? Is that going to be a requirement? because I think some servers do not have that capability in them yet, that
Yeah.
there are mailboxes that you can't put things into or take out of.
I think we have two options. One is to eliminate the requirement and instead to say that if the message is moved in, there's some default behavior, which I'm not sure what it would be. And if the message is moved out, it is implicitly awoken. Another option, I think, and my IMAP might be too poor to be correct here, is that we could require that ACL support is present and that this mailbox must have access control that restricts you from adding to it. But I see a thumb down.
Yeah, I like the first one better of that.
Yeah.
So. But Alexei is coming to respond to this. So.
Yep.
I'm not going to fight you on this. I agree with you. Magic mailboxes, ideally, not a good idea. So, and so the other side of the other thing I wanted to say is not yet fully sold on the new command, but I think it basically we need to review all extensions that affect UID copy and UID move to make sure that this is handled in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Or, modular the differences, obviously, so that it kind of, I know it's more like if we can minute that it's a to-do item we need to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suspect from the reaction from, people in the room and remote that there is enough interest in this.
Yeah.
Pete Resnick. So as you were describing this, I thought, what's the use of the snooze mailbox in the first place? I understand implementation-wise why that makes it easier, because now you've got all the messages that you have to deal with later in one place, and then you can do the trigger off that. But that seems arbitrary. Why wouldn't I be able to say, snooze this set of actions on this message wherever it may live, which may involve a move, which may involve a flag change, which may involve any other number of things, like, for instance, queue it over to this other process. The move mailbox seems like it could be removed from this, and you could still implement it that way, but it seems like you could just do this as a much more generic protocol proposal and then leave to the implementation whether they use a snooze mailbox or whether they have a list of messages, that are waiting to be snoozed. Seems perfectly good.
So to make sure I understand you, Pete, I think what you're suggesting is something like a defer command where you would say, here is an action to take at some future time. And to implement exactly this, you would move the message to snoozed and defer its removal from snooze.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then it's a normal mailbox. You may in your UI say, nope, can't move anything into snooze. That's fine. But your UI is dealing with the idea of the snooze mailbox. And if for all I care, that could be a flag, not a mailbox.
Yeah.
And in many implementations probably would be.
Sure.
So just remove the whole idea of the mailbox and just make it a defer command or a snooze command, whatever you like.
And if it gets expunged, then that goes away. So a UID move will wipe the old thing and the defer's lost automatically. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I will actually second Pete on this. It's probably implementable with flags. You still need to store extra metadata because you want to substitute flags at a later date, but you can do it in place by just defining a new key, one or two more extra keywords saying, this is snoozed. So basically clients, when they scan from mailbox, they will just don't show it or something. I don't know.
We have quite a long queue here at the moment. Are all these people still waiting in the queue, or have you just not removed yourself yet? All right. Just, pop up when you're ready to talk. I think it's all good.
Yeah. So that's,
go for it.
This is actually, I think, what I was pointing out was actually been by Alex and Pete was about that instead of doing the concept of the mailbox per se, we should actually use the flags things and then let the client decide whether they want to implement it as a mailbox thing or they just want to put tags or flags and work on it that way. And that way, all your flags, that information for the snooze flag would be awakened to, and all of that may come up there.
Yeah.
That might.
None. It was short.
This is Ken. So based on Pete's feedback,
Yeah.
I'd like Pete to review the Civ Snooze draft, which has similar language. So you may have an issue with that too, and I'm more than happy to change text.
Yeah, the Civ Snooze, I mean, yes, that'd be great. The Civ Snooze draft is much less prescriptive about what happens with the message in the interim. So, but it'd be good to get looked at.
Yeah, this is Pete again, and I'm glad to review it. I have no dog in this fight. However you guys want to implement this seems like a cool feature, and that's fine. Just architecturally, it seems like an easier thing to make it much more generic. So yeah, I took a quick glance through the Civ document because this came up, and I thought, okay, well, yeah, same ideas.
So I disagree about making it more generic. I think that kind of the point of this is two things. There's a common paradigm that's implemented in a whole bunch of places, and they pretty much all work the same way. And so trying to support like extra use cases beyond that makes it less likely this will be implemented, because, like, for example, if you can arbitrarily do some defer command later, there's a good chance most people won't implement that, because that's not what their backend supports. Their backend already supports snooze, and they're all pretty similar. So I think that's the downside of trying to make it more generic. And yeah, I actually think that makes it more complicated. And I've lost whatever other thought I had on this right now, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's for the record, that's my tentative feeling also. I defer sounds very neat, and I think I want to think about it and write about it more, but it feels to inch a bit towards all things to all people, which is very dangerous in a lot of designs. Yeah, Pete.
Oh yeah, the other thing, so I'll just go quickly. It was someone mentioned, and then the clients could, implement this however they wanted with the server, but that loses the point, which is that this is synchronized between the clients and they can all provide a consistent view, which again is a reason to make it less generic, so that you're more likely to see something consistent if you use different clients.
So this is Pete again, and Neil used the magic words that send my hackles up, which is because that's the way the backing does it. And this has been the disaster of IMAP from the get-go, is that, when Mark designed it, it was because that's the way his file system worked. And that's what screwed over a lot of clients, because they didn't deal with the world that way. And you end up with that semantic, ugliness between client and server, because then the client has to figure out what the backing looked like. And if you make and generic may be the wrong word, it's that you want to take the essential bits of this, irrelevant of what the server is actually doing in the background, and say, what can the server implement here? If the way you do this is move them to a special mailbox, well, that's one way to do it. But I can imagine a zillion different ways that a server might do this, depending on its backing, and this would make life harder for certain servers.
Yeah. I think so. Brian, I think, has been waiting in queue for quite a while.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I popped myself in the queue here to actually ask a more general question, which is, yes, we've got this in Civ, we've got this here in IMAP. Presumably, we also want to publish a Jmap version of it. Do we want to do all these together? And then I guess the question is going to come up for our area directors at some point. Are we going to try and, as more things happen in both Jmap and Extra in parallel, what do we want to do there? But maybe it's not time to do that this time. Maybe we'll wait till we have more area directors in art again.
To respond really briefly to Pete, I think that something Neil said that is also relevant is putting aside what the backend server does. If what we want is for different clients to be able to interpret the semantics of what the server plans to do, then indicating it as this message is snoozed until such time is easier to interpret than client A has indicated this message should be moved or unflagged at some future time, and client B must understand that's the common parlance for snooze. So being able to apply a name, I think, has a lot of value to it. regardless of the backend semantics. Alexi.
I think I jumped.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I think I jumped in just before Lexi in the queue again. I was just going to reply to again that my approach is not from this is how backends have implemented it. My approach was this is how it works as a product in various different services. It's from a user's point of view. There's quite a lot of consistency.
Alexi.
I think there are basically two general ways of doing this. One is, extra IMAP keywords that let the clients hide it from the view, or the server, hide it from the view, or whatever. Or there is a magic mailbox, right? Well, somewhat magic. We discussed to what extent a mailbox, yes. I suggest maybe once the draft is written, we'll discuss the two approaches and maybe settle on one. I suggest, well, I suspect we're probably not going to solve it in this room.
Yeah.
I also suggest that chairs probably should have a limit on how long we will discuss, and then we'll just pick one approach among this. There are benefits to one or the other, and there are, well, advantages and disadvantages to both of them. So, yeah.
All right.
Just it has to be a mailbox, because otherwise it will only work in clients that have explicitly added support for it. Whereas if it's a keyword, a client is just not going to do anything in other clients. If it's a mailbox, they will sync the stuff and it will have moved out of the inbox and it will move back in at the appropriate time. They don't have to know anything about it. So it can't be a keyword. It has to be in the mailbox.
This is still a server functionality. So server can still hide it from the viewer, actually. So, I mean, there are variations on, yes, it might be magic keywords that hide it from, tell the server not to show it until later on. But we can talk on
Yeah, let's take that to, I mean, I think there are strong reasons I'd argue for one way or the other, but let's take it to the list, because I think we've taken a lot of time.
My question is based off on what Pete said about the backing store and the implementation being two things. So this is very basically a concept of what really is a mailbox. In the maildir world or the mbox world, it's a file that resides in a particular place. But if you take this whole concept into a database sort of a back thing, then it becomes basically some table or something in a database hierarchy. So what I mean to say is a mailbox as a concept versus a mailbox as a particular place or something. So a mailbox as a concept that is implemented using tags, or mailbox as a concept that is implemented using a directory. I think we might need to just think slightly more onto how it may actually happen in the real world. And excuse me if I'm speaking something which you guys already know, because I'm very, very new in this area.
Yep. Thank you. I think we've reached the end of the queue.
Woohoo.
Okay. Let's take a next slide. I think I think that's about it, just about. Yeah, okay, there's two more things. One is, it's worth noting that what Fastmail does in its implementation is we have a conventional flag that is used to indicate a message recently awoke. That lets you see the message isn't just back in your mailbox. You didn't forget that you ever snoozed it. It is, you can see this has been deferred. I think a suggestion and a registered common flag for that would be useful, or we've gone a bit off the rails on exactly what happens, but this function is useful. Similarly, the save date extension is useful here because you can see when the message returned to the mailbox, if in fact it has left and returned to the mailbox as part of being snoozed and awoken. Next. I think that's the last slide on snooze. Yeah, right. Let's talk about the Civ one. Well, we'll do that next. Okay. Shall we move on to the next topic?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
I like to think this one is simpler, but let's see. It does call into question, what is a mailbox? So, right. So a number of implementations now, client implementations let you visualize, well, they let you see mail with labels stuck on it, implemented in one of several ways. Sometimes it is using user flags. Sometimes you're putting the message in multiple mailboxes. Jmap is to some extent built around the idea that you will put an email in multiple mailboxes, and these can be treated like labels. And because you truck with emails in terms of a single email in multiple emails, no special work is required. But if we want to expose this in IMAP for clients that would like to show the various mailboxes in which a message appears, which is to say the various labels on the mailbox, we need to do some work. Next. So if we want to implement what I will call labels mode today, you need the server to implement object ID because we're going to want to map from emails found in a mailbox to the mailboxes in which they are found. And then to do that mapping, we're adding a data item to the messages called Mailbox Ids. Mailbox Ids is a list of the object IDs of the mailboxes in which this email appears. And the email here is as per the object ID capability. It's any message with the same email ID, which I believe is defined as the same UID validity, UID. It's all the non-changeable content of the message between mailboxes. Every mailbox that appears in, when you fetch its mailbox IDs, you will be told what the mailboxes are. You can't change this property. It's computed for you when you copy, move, delete, whatever else these messages. That's how you change the mailbox IDs. Next. The complication we've been talking about internally, and I'm sure there will be many complications, is that if you have this computed property on a message in mailbox 1, and that message is also found in mailbox 2, but you delete it from mailbox 2, you'd like the mod seek in mailbox 1 to be updated because its mailbox IDs property has been updated through action at a distance. This is going to be either complicated or not, depending on your implementation. Unfortunately, it's a little complicated for our implementation. Your mileage may vary. Next. Yep, if you want to set the mailbox IDs or the labels on a message, you just move it around. It should all be able to work implicitly. One thing that does come up is this leads us to want the ability to copy a message into a mailbox only if it does not already exist by email ID. This should probably be spun off into a separate conversation, so I don't want to get too far into it. But you can imagine that if you have a message and you say you want to add a label, which has already been added, you don't want to copy that message and have two versions of that message with distinct UIDs, but the same email ID in one mailbox. You're going to have a bad time. Next.
That could possibly be done with modseek checks, but I can't remember whether copy and move allow you to test modseek. Store certainly does.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Next, yep, great. Much more prosaic concern. Any client that's any good that allows you to use labels, allows you to color the labels, and we'd like to allow that for labels mode of IMAP. So this is registering a piece of metadata for the mailbox where we store the color, define the way we do everything these days as a CSS3 named color or RGB code. The thing that's a bit more complicated is that then we need to be able to get the metadata efficiently when we select the when we list the mailboxes over IMAP. I believe, Brian, you're going to be talking about that in a minute, so I won't. But if you can't get the metadata in the list, and that's where we've put the color, you're going to have to select every mailbox to display the labels efficiently, and that's no good. Next.
Sorry, I've got a thing up. Let me.
Yeah, sure.
Pain. Okay, there we go.
Was that it? Might be the last slide.
That's the last slide.
There was no next.
There you go.
So those changes are, in concept, straightforward, but I think they led us to efficiently bootstrap an IMAP client to display multi-mailbox labels with color and to keep it in sync efficiently, depending on the implementation. We have one person in queue, sir.
Just thinking about this color thing is what makes the Jmap Preferences Object actually become part of the protocol in this particular use case, as I understand, because we're talking about Thunderbird on one machine on my Linux box and the Thunderbird on the Windows box. Basically, I want to have the same interface, and the best place to keep that information is in the server. So that's where we could put something like a preferences object, preferences for the mailbox, and the preferences object per se could be actually opaque in terms of whatever information you put it. That may be a sort of a client specific, if we can have something like.
Yeah, so
So some place like, but basically just an object store for at the server level to store some information that the server, like
Yeah.
Outlook does it with across. They have this whole concept now of Outlook in the cloud where you can actually store your preferences in the cloud.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely plausible to talk about Jmap being useful as a sort of a generic key value store for well-known properties. But on the other hand, being able to say there's one specific property, which is color, which we apply to the mailbox, gets rid of a lot of complexity in thinking about what else people will use a generic key value store for. Fastmail's already got an extension for the color property on mailboxes. We already implement it in terms of metadata on the mailbox, and it's dead simple. I think that's the least complicated part of this whole suggestion. That's the end of Q. If there's nothing else, I will thank you and sit down. Thank you.
Cool. I just need to pop my slides up here because I realized I didn't upload them yet, but that will take me 10 seconds, and then I will show you very quickly the metadata slides. Upload. Ah! Nobody saw that. Yep. 10 seconds. Don't zoom in on me while I'm shoving my finger up at people. Thanks, remote person. Okay. Slides, unshare, reshare. There we go. List return metadata. This is, for anyone who's seen list return my rights, this will look very familiar to you. It's very similar. Basically, you say, well, you're giving me a list for each mailbox, call get metadata on that mailbox with the following properties. And it looks like this. Is that readable at that size? Maybe not.
I'm going to be John Clancy.
Oh, thanks. We have plenty of time for that. I should have removed some more things from it. Anyway, as you can see here, if you say list return and you say metadata and you give a list of the metadata items you'd like it to return, after each list, it then returns the get metadata response that, as you can see, looks absolutely identical between the trash line there and the get metadata on the same trash with the same properties. And it just says, here's the value of these things. So it's very simple. And it allows you to do a full listing on the server and get the metadata at the same time. This is implemented in Cyrus IMAP, has been for very many years. I can't remember whether I added an X capability for it or not, probably not, but it would be very easy to do. So I will write a draft and ask my co-chair to do a call for adoption on this, and it should be pretty trivial, I imagine. Any comments?
Just as Ken, just one comment. So this is really the only way to get all the information, as Rick was saying, in one go, since when get metadata was changed from annotate more, I think, we removed the ability to wildcard the list of mailboxes that you want to fetch that item on. So unless we put that back in, the wildcarding back in, I think this is probably the most efficient way to do this. And we already have a handful of return options anyway, so adding this one makes sense to me.
Cool. In that case, I think we're at the point where we need to look at our milestones, unless there's any other business for the extra working group. I don't see any people jumping up. Let's have a look at our milestones. Here we go. We have adopt a document for AII with Civ, and we have submit said document to ISG. Let's have a look at what we're going to do about that, I guess.
Is there an option in the dates that you can say when hell freezes over? Probably not. Yeah, has anyone even started thinking about this yet? Oh, there is. Okay. I'm going to sit down.
I think somebody from Open Exchange. Was it Stefan Bosch? He actually wrote something. The difficulty is the last time Ned had a look at it and he said, oh, that needs quite a bit of work. So there is a document. Obviously, we're not ready and not anywhere near done with it, but okay. Well, I do wonder whether we can just kind of start adoption call. Well, ask Stefan to refresh it and say, we'll adopt it, but if obviously, no guarantee that it get done, I suppose, but I would rather adopt it and work it in the working group, even if we run out of steam at some point and decide it's not tractable.
I will reach out
It is
and
probably
ask for an
tractable.
update.
Okay, thank you.
And
Then the December date is obviously, yes, that one is unachievable.
might kick that one down the road a bit. Okay.
This is Barry. If he's not willing to continue with it, I'm happy to take it over. But yeah, regardless of what state it's in, I think we should just adopt it and go from there.
Okay, I will request a call for adoption. August will bump the delivery date out into next year. Mid next year. We can do other things from that. Okay, extra milestones. Submit. What do we want to submit here? We've got a bunch of documents, don't we, that we have agreed are going to go. IMAP partial, process IMAP. Snooze sounds like we may be delaying that a little bit just because we're all the snooze stuff will happen. But Civ Registry and yeah.
We're not planning to take all the
It's
things
adopted.
that are ready for working group last call and make milestones for them, right?
I was going to, yeah. 'Cause then I can
There's no
close it.
need for
And I
that.
can say it's done. All right, fine.
We just have them ready, just put them out for last call and go for it. We don't need milestones for them.
All right, so, but I will put in adopt a list return metadata draft for August. Adopt a snooze via IMAP draft for maybe September. That one might have a bit more faffing before we're ready to adopt. Anything else we need as milestones for extra at the moment? No.
Mailboxes as labels, I think we need to discuss, but we can discuss on the mailing list, chairs per meeting anyway. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other business in our last 8 minutes? Thanks, everybody. Look at that. We've pretty much landed on time. Good work. Enjoy the rest of your IETF. Yeah.
Or rather, I'm just wondering, the Google Gmail has these X labels, right? They use that in lieu of the mailbox labels. Is that the similar thing that we were talking about?
Yes, it works very similarly, but it uses labels rather than it uses the names of the mailboxes rather than the IDs.
Right. So what Google did was it added its own things with the X dash tag, while the MyMap basic thing has the labels, but it seems Outlook Exchange does not really. Sometime back when I checked, it wasn't supporting some sort of labels. I'm just, that's one of the issues, the implementation issue that.
All right, cool. I will unshare my screen. All right, thanks everybody.
You work with fast food, right? I used to use fast food for video. A friend of mine put me onto it in Malaysia. End of the product. I'm just trying to understand one thing. So you guys have created Jmap as way to go. Yes. And then I'm just while attending this IMAP. So IMAP is still, I'm still confused what we do in configuration.
Definitely Jmap is the future, but there's so much stuff on IMAP we're trying to keep IMAP useful still. So just the idea is to bring some of the features from Jmap back to IMAP. So just the class stuff with structuring them.
And how do you guys have your value system?